I'm going to talk about a project which is sort of in train, actually, which is looking at media solutions for the BBC. Victoria J at a Salford conference last year said that the main problem facing the BBC was findability. What she meant was that in an increasingly sort of database-driven world, where we have Google and Amazon and eBay, etc., being very dominant, Facebook, the quality media sources need to make sure people can find what they're putting out, and also across a breadth of content, so that you can make sense of the news or whatever, and you get retain a wide perspective. So public service media basically address market failure, and I strongly believe we've got a market failure happening with the increasing dominance of predictive analysis and content delivered to you by what you've decided, what you've told a database or databases you liked before. Typical Amazon, you bought this, therefore you'll like this. Okay, so this is what my presentation will cover. The rise of networks, big data, predictive analysis, implications for news organisations, and online services and the making of meaning, improving findability and market position in an increasingly database-driven mediascape. So this is interesting. This diagram here was by Mark Graham and Stefano de Sabata from the Internet Institute, which is absolutely fantastic. You probably know it in Oxford. And this is what they're doing is they're looking at empires, growing empires of content. You can see that the red, and of course it's aping the British Empire maps. Google is in red, Facebook is in blue, and other services like Baidu, Yahoo, etc. Are the other colours. You can see that China is absolutely out on its own with a completely different service to everybody else. And they've just done this, August 2013. But I thought it illustrates sort of why we really need to assist quality news sites to maintain their position in this market. And the reason Facebook and Google, etc., are able to do this is because they're very good at big data management. And this is IBM, who are looking at this, obviously, like everybody else is starting to. Big data comes in different types. It's high volume, or it's a big variety, or it's a high velocity, or a veracity. It's a sort of uncertain data. And there's internal data and external data, and sort of flows in between, internal data collection processes, such as customer analysis, and external data flows, such as, things like the stock markets, input coming into your organisation or company. Then I came across this guy. I thought he was really interesting. He's a blogger. He's called Ravi Kalota, and he's produced a series of an excellent diagram, I thought, which shows sort of three ways of internet development. And as we know, the internet's characterised by paratexts, that's additional material which reinforces the original material, intertextuality, it's recombinatory, it's multi-platform, and it's increasingly, as I say, driven by databases. But he's arguing that we're in a wave 3 now, which is an industrial internet, increasingly machine-based, using machine-based analytics, database-driven content, participatory platforms, deep domain expertise, it's automated, and it's using predictive analysis. So here I've been reading books about big data, mainly because it's this is new to everybody. There's a great book I recommend to you called Big Data at Work, Dispelling the Myths and Uncovering the Opportunities. It's by a guy called Thomas Davenport, and he was a professor, and he identifies 3 phases in the adoption of big data. Era number one is Analytics 1.0, is characterized by data sources that were relatively small and structured and came from internal sources. It had to be stored in enterprise warehouses or marts before analysis. The majority of analytical activity was descriptive analytics or reporting. It took several months of batch processing. Quantitative analysts were segregated from business people so that the analysts were separated from the people who were making the decisions in the back offices. And very few organisations completed they had incomplete data stores. And 2.0, according to him, starts to begin about 2003. And that for me is interesting because that's, if you look at the dates of the dot-com bubble and burst, I looked at Investopedia, they reckon that phase began on March the 11th, 2000 to October the 9th, 2002. So here we get the need for analytics to sort of to analyse in depth what's going wrong, what's happening with user behaviours and with marketing and with e-commerce structures. So this promoted the development of this new phase of very complex data analytics. And these techniques were swiftly adopted by Google, Yahoo, eBay and others, and Amazon. And this data forms not only the basis for their internal decisions, but also for how they make their services and how they develop their services. On the other hand, many large companies, particularly like the BBC, The Guardian, etc., stuck to traditional internal analytics. The BBC particularly still looked at television bums on seats, Rajar, Barb, stats, and they didn't really analyse the social media. And I kept saying to them, there's a lot of information coming in from these customer interactions in the forums and chat rooms, etc. You really need to have a look at this. This is live data that's coming in, which would be of interest. But the capability, there wasn't much capability then to actually do this. So let's see what people are saying is going on. Again, this chap Davenport, a great mind, I think. He's looking at what's happening, and he's saying that 3.0, the data analytics, is about multiple data types, large and small volumes of data, internal and external, structured and unstructured formats. And these give new insights into what's going on, what's happening in these heavily recombinatory services. And you can see there that there's a cycle, and big data analytics take place at various points. But the main point is there has to be a flow through, and everything has to be connected up. So this is what we were already talking about this morning. Data, machine learning, and then spewing out predictions. There's a lot of data coming into Facebook, etc. Professor Eric Siegel said that he quotes his quote from him: every medical procedure, credit application, Facebook post, movie recommendation, fraudulent acts, spammy email, purchase of any kind is encoded as data and warehoused. And this also, it's not just your data, it's your friends of your friends, your family, and if you add on top of that geolocate and what you're purchasing, then there's an enormous amount of data about how you're using the media, what you're doing, where you are, and what platforms you're accessing on, which needs to be harvested. So, moving on to predictive analytics. So this is looking at what you've entered already. If you go on Facebook, you'll notice if your eye moves to the right, you will be offered increasingly stuff that you didn't know you wanted, or you'll be marketed in a very selective way. I was looking at holidays in Thailand, and I suddenly noticed on my Facebook page that I was being offered information about Thailand from a range of different providers, and this is before you've even thought about your clicking through and actually booking the holiday. You're being suggested, you're being, if you like, tipped to buy or to consume. And so there's new sorts of jobs coming on stream here: data miner, statistician, and this sort of job is going to be incredibly important in the next few years. So here to illustrate the sort of thing I'm talking about is here's me on Netflix. It knows I've recently watched House of Cards. It's suggesting top picks for me. So I'm getting a very narrow list of content, if you like. It's not selected by me or an editor who could exercise editorial judgment. It's totally selected for me on what my previous choices. So, and I think this has big implications for sort of citizenship, really, and the education of citizens. I'm not alone in this. Google's the leader in predictive analysis, and he's recently they've bought DeepMind. That's a UK-based firm that uses sophisticated algorithms to, again, like the last speaker, is looking at exactly how your mind works and trying to model it in a sort of machine framework. With predictive analytics, we're moving into a mediascape where media, everything's tailored to you, what you like, where you are, what you're using. It's all person-centric, or it's becoming person-centric. Facebook's also at it, not to be outdone by Google. Facebook's also hired an expert in machine learning, Professor LeCrun from New York University. So we're seeing these academic researchers working closely with industry now to push things forward. And it's all about what they want is they want to, just like this is seamlessly leading on this morning, they want to build the best algorithms. They want to suggest content in a very subtle way to you. In this way, this is sort of replacing the editorializing of content, which used to be done by news editors, etc. So Google is increasingly coming under fire. And I think what I'm seeing is there are companies that were internet born who know how to use the networks of networks and predictive data and database driven content and social media, etc. They're literate. They are very digitally literate in the internet and how it works. And these corporations have been able to take advantage of a market where there was very little opposition, because the public service media and the other, for example, were lagging behind, particularly in other parts of Europe. They're still at the first stage of the internet, launching very simple websites. Mark Dopfner, the CEO of the German media firm Axel Springer, wrote an open letter recently to a German newspaper accusing Google of beginning to act like a nation state. And he actually works with, they market their media with Google, but he was becoming increasingly worried about this. Facebook has also come under fire last week, been in the news if you've been following it. They've been offering selective news to people, happy news and sad news, to see if it made you more likely to buy or consume, or if it changed the way you behaved and consumed your media. They want to encourage you to consume Facebook more and to obviously access the clever marketing messages. So they didn't tell anybody, they didn't tell any of the users, and this clearly breaks the Universal Code of Research Integrity. But there are other things connected, implications to do with, as I said, the making of meaning out of a thing, the holistic consumption of a well-balanced range of news from which you can make decisions. So here we go back to one of my favourites, Etienne Wenger, Wenger expressed the making of meaning, or reification, as being critically important skill for active citizens and publics. You need to know all the facts to be able to enter into a reasoned debate and synthesize the debate through all these sorts of things, through participating with others, through having instruments through which you can make meaning, points of focus. You need to draw on your experience, on your knowledge of the world. You need to be able to negotiate with others to come to a conclusion, and that's the basis of democracy. So coming to news, I've just started to do this data analysis. So I'll give you some indicative findings. I'm basically doing a comparative textual analysis of 4 websites, and that's the Huffington Post, National Public Radio, both in the States, and the Guardian and the BBC in the UK. So I'm looking at both sides of the Atlantic. I'm also looking to find out, I want to find out how they're making themselves findable, and how they're also moving from a sort of a web 2.0 to a web 3.0 database-driven environment. So how well they're adapting, really. So here's some findings. The Huffington Post, I don't know if you know it, you can drop down top left and you can get hundreds of editions. I mean, well, probably about 60 to 70 editions of the Huffington Post, depending on the country you live in. So it's certainly global, and it's very networked. And I think it's an interesting case because they're using, it's internet born. It didn't have to transform from a traditional media background. It just is the internet. It's using internet conventions. It's sensational, it uses tabloid news, and it aggregates the best of the bloggers. That's what it's famous for. On first glance, you can see a very good double navigation bar. Therefore, there's a wide range of entries into their vast collection of material. And also, you can see the use of the words graphic pictures, which basically, as anybody knows, if that makes you want to click. It's the tabloid newspaper technique since ancient times, well used by the news of the world. So there's a sort of blend of tried and trusted techniques and new techniques. Here we have a mix of stories. There's a pretty girl. There's a scare story. There's a scandal. But as you move through the site, the marketing messages, as I said, and the proximity marketing messages change to suit your location and your previous reading choices. So you're being taken on a journey, and you don't know whether you're taking yourself or somebody else is taking you. They're using lots of sort of techniques, heavy use of social media. This is a screen grab from just around one of the stories, and this is repeated many, many times. Heavy use of social media recommendations, likes, use of clipping services, that's, Dig, Delicious, etc. So you can build up your own archive. A newsletter, email a friend, recommend, share, tweet. So everything is asking you to amplify the service. So the users are distributing the service as much as the service is distributing itself. You're being used to amplify what's being given to you. The Huffington Post, what I'm also seeing is a blending of broadcasters and newspaper people, print and broadcasting, and this is a typical example. So the Huffington Post has now got a daily live show for its fans, regular fans, and you can join in tweet, post a text and comment, so you can view and engage and look again, etc., and then it leads you around to all the other content. This is very, very sophisticated, I think. They're also starting to offer original programming on YouTube channels. Talk Nerdy to Me is from HuffPost Science, and it's regular short clips, which is taking the form of a sort of television channel on YouTube. So this is, again, what I'm seeing is this paratext. So these are secondary texts to the primary text, which are then distributed, and people are asked to forward them across the internet. So, findings on the Huffington Post. Orientation is towards multimedia, multi-platform. There's a blending of publisher, broadcaster. Heavy use of predictive analysis. Is it ready for an internet culture, a participatory culture? Yes. There's stories that appeal very much to a heavy internet user, you know, the cuddly cats and all that kind of thing. There's a sophisticated drill down of stories and navigation. If you like that, you'll like this. Recommendation structure, very strong. And comment and use of user-generated content. So it feels very much that the audience is there, the users are there, they're present in the content. So National Public Radio. National Public Radio is, as you will all probably know, it's one of the most loved and respected sources of information in the US, and it's where opinion formers like to get their news. It's the equivalent, I think, of the Today programme on Radio 4 in the UK. It's opinion forming. It's trusted quality journalism. So how far has National Public Radio evolved into this sort of towards this third wave of the internet? Well, they're moving towards being multi-platform. They offer apps which place their content, their audio content, radio/radio content, on phone, Kindle and iPad. There's podcasts, so you can listen to the station anytime, 24 hours. There's a 24-hour stream, an hourly news update. So I'm just clipping these from different places on the website. But I think this is still very much a broadcast model rather than a networked model, i.e. the content is going from producer to user. And that's the dominant paradigm. There isn't this networked people moving it around and spreading it. National Public Radio's social media strategist, a chap called Andy, he's great. He's organised a presence on Facebook and Twitter for the network, but this is an external data stream which hasn't been internalised, if you like, into the NPR's own database-driven content, such as it has, and it doesn't have much. So the question is, who owns the audience data? Is it Facebook or is it National Public Radio? Obviously, Facebook can look at the data, but who owns the user accounts? And as we know in the past, people are buying a lot of these in the sort of middle phase of the internet. People started buying up online communities and social media services because they wanted to own the accounts or get access to the users so that they have them in your single sign-on system and your database of clients and customers. So having a look, it does offer what I'm calling agents of amplification, trending topics and newscasts, don't miss. You can forward things and comment. There's a little bit of e-commerce with a shop. There's some sponsorship and sort of an invitation to generally support National Public Radio. So that's good. We're moving forward. But as I said, despite this, I think National Public Radio is predominantly a portal to the radio programming. Radio is still NPR's primary business, and it relies on its loyal audience who love NPR as it is. So the website suits their audience, their habits, and there's a focus on quality. So here we are. Orientation is radio and online, separated though largely, although it's a portal. Multi-platform, yes, that's great. The website largely supports the radio network. I couldn't really see any use of predictive or big data, but I'll go back and keep looking. It sort of creeps in as under beta tests these days. Are they ready for an internet culture? Not really. It's designed for a very specific audience. It's partly ready. Slightly older audience, but they do access, that audience are very literate, digitally literate, and they use a wide range of access devices, but they're not really Facebookers or that kind of thing. So we look at The Guardian. The Guardian is the UK's, one of the UK's flagship newspapers. It's transitioned very well, I think, into the network era. The website is very much seen as an essential part of the business. And it's sort of its own brand almost. It's also very cleverly diversifying into other businesses, and I'll show you. And it's working in collaboration with other organisations, particularly the BBC, who's supplying video content for The Guardian now. But I think the Guardian Online is very distinctive. And so here's some bits and pieces clipped from around the website. There's lots of web-based activities, lots of participatory culture in evidence. There's a very large online jobs agency for academics, which I know academics look for jobs there all the time. And it sort of augments the Guardian, the Times Higher, and the Times Educational, the Guardian Higher, and their sort of network, and it's a foil to the Times Higher Ed. They've got e-commerce, Guardian Travel and Holidays. They've got an online dating agency. They've got training and seminars. They've got an annual media conference. They do talks as well from sort of seminal speakers. They also provide, interestingly, a sort of Which-like comparison service, so you can find the best mortgage, mobile phone, and so on. So The Guardian has used the web to diversify into new areas, and it's providing them with an increasingly wide set of revenue streams, which will help them transition well into the sort of, the fragmentary mediascape. They've also adopted many internet conventions. They're therefore a hybrid organisation, and that's beginning to transition well into the industrial internet era. Here we have the shops, etc., the travel, the money deals, the bookshop, and so on. And they've got a good comment network. They were always very good at social media. A lovely lady called Meg used to run their online communities, and they've always been put money and time into managing the online community and the fan base. They're supported by reader comments, and you can see that they like to show that the number of comments on every story. So they're showing that there's a return path, there's incoming data coming in, and of course they're multi-platform. So the other thing I think is interesting, this blend of broadcaster-publisher, they're starting to offer video channels on YouTube. So this is one of their channels, and I don't know whether they're originating some original Guardian video content or whether it's all repackaged BBC content. I'm not sure, but it'd be interesting to find out. But so here are their channels. Football, Guardian Witness, which draws on the great strength of their journalism, and Guardian Music, which is interesting, which I think must reflect the readership. So here's The Guardian, multimedia, multi-platform. The website is very much its own entity. It's, you can read The Guardian online. You can read it on your iPads. There's apps. There's all sorts of ways of reading the content, and it's as popular as the newspaper. There's no use of predictive data, but I noticed that they just launched a beta new homepage or new website, which is, they're saying it's responsive. So a new beta responsive website is coming. Are they ready for an internet culture? Yes. They've got all these things. And they've got a blend of online, real-world activities and online. So they're really well placed strategically. So to my fourth case study, just to conclude really, is the BBC, as you know, launched its website in 1997. It was hand-built, so I was one of the first 3 web producers working on it. And we literally worked in raw HTML coding. And then I worked on the first database-driven content, which was WebGuide, a guide to the web, and that launched in 1998, early 1998. And then later, the second database-driven content was message boards, and that launched in 1998 as well. So the problem for the BBC is they have to make sure they've got content for everybody. Universal access, and they've got to address market failure, and they've got to make sure that every single person in the UK has something of value. They also have a mission to inform, educate and entertain, so the website has to very much reflect that. But like The Guardian, which won Website of the Year, the BBC's website has also won awards, as you know. So it's got a very interesting navigation structure, double navigation, but it's also got bits that expand, bits that scroll. So they're very, very clever with their homepage on how to get you into the content. And it's so this vertical and horizontal navigation. So how well is it overall transforming? There is a .com, a sort of a .co.uk version and a .com version of the website. So all this content can be viewed globally, or a selection of it. And there's a BBC World Service online as well. So the BBC can become a global internet brand if it wishes. It's also got all these services, mobile, connected television, which is, connected television is the red button, these overlays, and these additional video which you can access through your red button. News feeds, alerts, email, etc. But what I'm seeing is there's very little analysis of audience data, and I was talking last night to the head of the BBC's editorial policy unit, and I asked him the question, are you linking up your audience data yet? Is it still Barb Rajar on the one hand for the broadcast stuff and ABC for the internet stuff, click-throughs? Is it joined up yet? No, it's still not joined up. So that's the sort of mission that the BBC has to, or a barrier, the hurdle that the BBC has to climb. Marketing is driving some of this development, very much so. I was talking to Thinkbox last year, who do the Channel 4's marketing. They help the independent broadcasters adopt new marketing ways of doing new marketing and processes and techniques. And they were very much of the mind that marketing is driving some of these new navigation and findability techniques. And of course the BBC doesn't market, it hasn't got a tradition of marketing. It trails its own content, and it sometimes recommends externally, but that's new. I remember being at a meeting in 2002 and with Ashley Highfield, who said, anybody got any ideas for the BBC's website? And I said, why aren't we trailing, why doesn't BBC One trail BBC Two or BBC Three, BBC Four, etc.? There was a policy of the channel controllers are in silos with silo budgets, and they would never trail each other's services. So they started to cross-trail, but that's as much really as the BBC did at that time. So it needs to not market, but it needs to market itself. But the saving grace for me of the BBC's web content is the BBC iPlayer, which again was born of the internet, made for the internet, and you can see it's got a recently watched, and they're very keen to start tracking behaviours around the iPlayer, and they're also going to launch a new service called My BBC, which looks like it will use big data. Well, it will use big data, I understand from my conversation last night. And that's great, because it'd be very good for the BBC's children's content, for example, because children expect this kind of spreadability, sociability, collaboration, participation, etc. It'd also be very good for some of the other services that the BBC has to do or wants to do, and that's to educate citizens, make meaning, have fantastic debates before elections and so on, and to educate people in the UK. And I think they're very, very good at this. It's pan-platform, they're collaborating with, they're providing content for all sorts of people, adults, schools, parents, teachers, you name it. And their learning content is very pan-platform, it's collaborative, it's convergent and quite advanced. And here they have, they're also giving back a lot of their material, which is very public service. They're giving back bits of the archive, they're providing podcasts, aggregating some of their content, the factual programming, for example, lifting out stuff from the iPlayer and aggregating it together for use. And they also have collaborations with Wikipedia, the School of Everything, particularly the Open University. So, the findings on the BBC then is that it's multimedia, it's multi-platform. There are lumps of database-driven content. There is a single sign-on process, which means that all their user data is in one place, in one audience/user/listener database, which is great. That means that they can communicate back to the audience very effectively. So that's moving towards big data. And the creation of the My BBC service will definitely be using big data, so they're getting ready. But I feel they're very much a distribution platform still. They're still taking the content to people, and there's not so much participation or prosumer activity of the audience co-creating areas of the site. There are some diaries. There was Video Nation, that terrific service which launched and was on the web television and the website. But this is all in sort of lumps here and there to do with particular brands or activities. So there are no networks. They do have social media, but it's on Facebook and Twitter, so the same problem that National Public Radio has, the BBC has. Who owns that audience data? No e-commerce, it's against the BBC Charter. Lots of collaborations, lots of events, and lots of training. So overall, indicative findings, and I'm still crunching this data, and there's obviously a lot of it, a lot to look at and make sense of and boil down. So the online news distribution services I'm looking at in the study, on both sides of the Atlantic, are really not wholly ready for an industrial internet driven or informed by big data, with, I would say, the exception of the Huffington Post. But the Huffington Post and the Guardian embrace internet culture wholeheartedly. The dominant paradigm for the BBC and National Public Radio remains broadcasting, but now increasingly via internet protocols. Internet-born services, Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc., will continue, therefore, to have a competitive advantage over the next few years over transitioning media outlets, and that's something that we really need to address. Thank you very much for your attention.